Welcome to our memorial for Mick McDonnell. This is co-sponsored by AmeriCeltic and the San Jose Dublin Sister Cities program. Michael McDonnell was born on the 8th of August, 1889, in the townland of Rathdoffmore, near Knockanana village, and that's County Wicklow. And he was the eldest child of Michael McDonnell and Julia O'Toole McDonnell. Mick was working in Dublin as a young man as the First World War began, and he joined the secret Irish Republican Brotherhood to fight for Ireland's freedom. He served as garrison quartermaster at Jacob's factory during the Easter Rising of 1916 and was promoted to the field to the rank of second lieutenant. Mick served as a camp cook while imprisoned at Frongach in North Wales with Michael Collins, and they became close friends and comrades in the cause. Now, during the 1919 Irish War of Independence, Collins appointed Mick leader of the squad, whose mission was to eliminate all British agents. Now, as the Civil War raged in 1921, Michael Collins sent Mick here to San Jose on a special mission. After Michael Collins was assassinated on August 22nd, 1922, Mick lived out the rest of his life here in San Jose, working for the McEnery family until his death in 1950. Now, Mick's funeral was celebrated at St. Mary's in Los Gatos, and he is buried right here, Mission Santa Clara Cemetery. So right now I'd like to introduce a person whose family was great friends of this Irish patriot. He's a playwright, historian, and former mayor of San Jose. Please welcome Mr. Tom McEnery right here.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Sean, and thanks Tony for organizing this. I like to say that I don't have as large crowds as I used to, but the quality is improving tremendously. Tremendously. So, Sean, that was good. You laid out pretty much the outlines of who this individual was. And I knew him as a very young boy, but I've heard many stories about him. Come on in here, Mary.
Please sit down. If you want the shade, we have shade.
I've never had my speech interrupted by a more beautiful woman. Yeah, you've heard this speech before, Mary.
We all have, Tom.
What we and this is audience participation, so just join in, correct my facts.
As if you had a choice.
As if that were the choice. McDonnell was someone, again, who I knew as a very young boy, almost a child. He died at an age much younger than I am now. But the stories I heard of him from my father and from others, my uncle Henry McEnery was pastor of St. Thomas Aquinas Church in Palo Alto and built St. Albert the Great. But he was also an Irish historian, and I'll refer to his eulogy as this speech progresses. But you know, what do you think of someone that you know as a boy? He was what I consider a very old man. He looked a little bit like McFadden here. You see him as just through the glaze of what a child or a boy would. But then you hear stories about him. My dad, I remember particularly stories my dad would tell about him. But let me go back a minute to exactly who he was. I said to Gary, who wrote a very interesting article about Mick McDonnell, Mick Mac he was called by the squad, and he referred in, as I say, a very interesting complimentary article to him as an assassin. And indeed, as in most wars, he killed people. And when I refer back to this old man who I knew and saw many times at our house, and he worked in a spot in San Pedro Square that is right now O'Flaherty's bar that we're so proud of and remember fondly all the work that Ray did there. That's the building he worked in. So he was an old man here in San Jose, but he was something much, much more. And I did say to Gary, he was probably the most significant revolutionary of modern history who ever lived in the state of California. And you might even rank him very highly, and I certainly would, as one of the major revolutionary figures who ever was driven out of his country and came to live in this beautiful land of immigrants called the United States. He formed a group called the Squad, and Tim Pat Coogan, who's a friend of mine and a friend of many of yours, has a book right now coming out, The 12 Apostles. The 12 Apostles were a group of people who did some very ruthless, daring, and dramatic actions in Ireland. They killed people. But what's very important to know about them is that, unlike other revolutionary groups, they operated under the auspices of a legitimately and formally elected government. Their party, Sinn Féin, had won 70% of the votes in the election, the so-called khaki election in 1918. So this was a sanctioned republic that's very unique in revolutionary history anywhere in the world. Today, this wasn't some caliphate, this wasn't some group of disgruntled people who just committed crimes and hoped to get some great reward later on. This was a group, as my uncle said in his eulogy, 1950, St. Mary's Church in downtown Los Gatos, who were soldiers of Ireland, who fought for something that they believed in very deeply. And yes, they did horrible things. I'll refer to a story my father said about Mick McDonnell, who came to my father one time and he said, I just find a very difficult time getting over the things that I had to do there. And he'd been away from Ireland for a very long time, since 1921. He'd led a very good life here. He had 2 children. One of his sons, who died recently, was a colonel in the American Air Force and highly decorated in Vietnam. So he'd led a good life. But he had a hard time forgetting, as any, I think, human being would, the things he had to do in Ireland, the things that he felt compelled to do in Ireland, the things that he felt charged to do in Ireland. And what he did is walk up to people, not in the distance. This wasn't drone attacks from hundreds and thousands of miles away. This was walking up to somebody who was a sworn enemy and killing them. It's a pretty brutal thing. And it certainly leaves a scar. And you'll find in Tim Pat Coogan's book that's coming out, you always hear, of course, about the glories of war. Well, there was nothing glorious, really, about this war as far as what had to be done day in and day out. You've all seen the Michael Collins movie. McDonnell was the top lieutenant. He was the one charged with the horrible things that had to be done. He's the one that had to implement the strategy that Michael Collins formulated, that basically, it didn't bring the British Empire to its knees, but he made the price high enough. He made the price high enough.
And it was sanctioned by the Dáil.
And it was sanctioned by the Dáil. He made the price high enough that the British Empire, that wasn't the cruel, impossible empire that has existed other places in the world, but horrible things were done on their side also. Let me just read you something from my uncle's eulogy that I think is kind of interesting. You know, he said that day in 1950, "I'm sure McDonnell would want me to quote the words of his hero Patrick Pearse, to the effect that the most honored shrines of the Gael are the graves of our Fenian dead. The men of 1920 took the saint's word for it, the saint of 1916. There was a no more sacred troth entrusted to the soldiers of Ireland than to risk their life in search for the means of breaking the connection with England and of peace and freedom." I love that old language. It's much better than the kind we use today. You know, it's much more mellifluous. It says many more things to it. You know, I'll tell you one other little family story, that when my dad was state chairman of the Democratic Party and he served as superintendent of the San Francisco Mint, he got a visitor who spoke to him about McDonnell. The visitor was head of the FBI, and he came and informed my father in his office in San Francisco that they had arrested a fellow named Mick McDonnell, who was one of the primary terrorists. That word maybe did not have as much currency then as now. They arrested a fellow named Mick McDonnell with thousands of dollars in his suitcase. And he was a known person that had committed horrible acts in Ireland. And as I said earlier, as in any war, yes, he did commit horrible acts, sanctioned by a legitimate government of the people, and now he was in exile here. And the head of the FBI asked my father if he knew exactly who he was. And as Tim Pat Coogan says in his book, Wherever Green is Worn, Mr. McEnery, my father, John McEnery, said he knew exactly who he was, he knew what he had done, he understood why he had did it, and he thanked the FBI agent for coming to his office, but told him that he'd be talking to him in the future. I really don't know what happened. I could make it more, I guess, of a dramatic story, but all the charges against McDonnell were dropped. McDonnell died shortly thereafter, but I want to repeat again that as far as California goes, or really the western United States, there was no more significant revolutionary who fought an empire than Michael McDonnell. As the old man I referred to earlier, he lived a very different life here. Whether he was on a mission for Michael Collins, even Tim Pat Coogan, who's the most noted historian of that time, really, of the IRA and those activities, he's not quite sure why he came here. But I want to give you one other what-if of history. In 1919, the head of the squad, Michael McDonnell, and a variety of individuals who he was charged, was sent to London on a mission. And that mission was to plot the assassination of the British cabinet and other assorted individuals. Now, this wasn't some lone wolf person showing up that maybe or maybe not might be able to accomplish something like that. They'd already just barely missed the assassination of the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, Sir John French. Missed him by a day or two. That was right on an hour or two, rather. That was on the outskirts of Phoenix Park. One of McDonnell's men was killed. No one was killed on the other side. They came that close to killing the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland. 2 years later, they assassinated the chief of the British General Staff, Sir Henry Wilson. It wasn't the security we have today for individuals, and we know the tragic history in this country and others of how people in important offices still are killed. So he was charged to go to London in 1919 and assassinate the British cabinet. He was to be able to take as many as 30 men. And these were all men very familiar with the kind of grim tasks they would have to carry out. The British cabinet at that time included people like Lloyd George, Austin Birkenhead, Lord Birkenhead, and also someone else that I think had a pretty major role in 20th century history, Winston Churchill. So McDonnell came back from that mission and reported to Collins and the Dáil cabinet that the price would be too high to carry out any of these attempted assassinations. There was a long debate in the Dáil, according to Tim Pat Coogan and my research. Half of it was in favor of going forward, and they did go forward with such a mission when they burned down the Custom House in 1921 in Dublin. It's really a seminal effect on what finally caused the truth. But McDonnell came back, reported to Collins, said the price would be too high, and they could do more effective work in eliminating agents, that's the only word to use for it, eliminate, murder, kill, agents of the British Empire, up to and including people who worked at the top levels of the Dublin castle. So, a what-if of history. What if McDonnell and his 30 men had gone over there? What if they had assassinated Winston Churchill? I think that's something that a better dramatist than I can take on as a future play or a movie, because it certainly would have changed everything in the world today if there was no Winston Churchill in 1940. So let me get back to one of the last stories I'll tell you today. When McDonnell again went to my dad shortly after he had the problems with the FBI and was actually indicted, and he told my father how difficult it was to put a gun up to somebody in a range much closer than I'm standing to the photographer and pull the trigger and feel the recoil. And if you read articles here, and the killing of Alan Bell, who was investigating Michael Collins and the Irish finances that kept the IRA in business, This was the man they pulled off the trolley right outside of Dublin 4 and killed him. And he said to my father, it's very difficult to live with that. Well, I think we know a little bit more about the measure of who Michael McDonnell was when you understand the terrible price he paid. The terrible price he paid in acrimony, in problems, in exile, because he is, again, like so many of us, the true and bona fide person who absolutely had to leave his country because of what he had done there and what the situation and the law that pertained there were. He had to leave, but not before he gave, I guess you would call, the full measure of devotion. He didn't die during the Troubles. He wasn't killed there. He lived and died in downtown Los Gatos. But I think a lot of them did die there in Dublin, just as the others. So I recommend Tim Pat Coogan's book to you, and you'll see what happened to the other of the 12 apostles. How most of them sacrificed, some of them their lives, but all of them their health, all of them their mental stability. Because I don't know anyone who can go back to a normal life. We have words for it when people come back from Iraq or Vietnam. It, I think, goes absolutely quadruple for people like McDonnell who had to carry out the acts that he did. So I think it's really important that, and I commend again Tony and all of you for coming here today, to recognize somebody who sacrificed so much for what he believed in, who fought as a soldier in Ireland, and should be remembered as such. But I think mostly he should be remembered as somebody who gave his all for something he believed in. So thank you.
Tom, are you taking questions? Sure. So you've probably researched this better than anybody I know of. And you've mentioned several times that he had to leave. Why was he sent here?
There's a couple of stories to that, and I've read his military testimony in the you can get it online in the Irish military records, and he'll talk about taking Alan Bell, who was the Dublin Castle person involved in investigating Michael Collins' Dáil loans. That's what kept the IRA going, taking him off the donkey trolley and killing him. So he wasn't reluctant to say things in the military history there. But unlike most other people who achieve any kind of attention in the world, he was very sparse in his words. And I really attribute that to what he had gone through. He didn't want to glamorize it. And unlike, again, almost anybody I know who has attained any kind of menial office, he cut off, this was 1948, he cut off his interview, where most of us would go on talking, telling all the things we had done. He said he had other things to do and he hoped he would come back someday, but he never did. Collins wrote him notes, and I talked to Tim Pat Coogan on the phone the other night, and this is also in the Dáil records. He got a very modest pension. I think it was $75 as a colonel in the Irish Army, which of course he was. I mean, he was more like a general really in those times. But what he came out here to do is really unknown. And I made a tremendous blunder when I had a chance to interview his son, again, who was a retired colonel in the United States Air Force. And I didn't, because when he went back there, he had a reunion with the other members of the squad. And there's, for those of you that are historians, Vinnie Burns and Paddy Daly and people like that, who were very talkative about all they'd done. They stayed in Ireland. Some of them went on and were members of the Dáil also. They all received pensions. They all were colonels or generals. But why he came out here and why Collins kept him here is really unknown. And Tim Pat Coogan has been unable to figure it out. He married again when he was out here and had 2 children, because he was married in Dublin. And we know the role of the church. Sorry, Father, but the role of the church toward the IRA, the Brotherhood, etc., did not cover the church with glory. They were not friendly to those who attempted the hierarchy only. The hierarchy, ordinary priest had a much different opinion, but the hierarchy was the hierarchy was very unfriendly to anyone of a revolutionary nature, and certainly we saw that in 1916, where of course McDonnell was a member of the group who fought at Jacob's factory. His commander and friend was a guy named John McBride. Just to give you a little factoid of history, his son John McBride won the Nobel Peace Prize. His daughter was Maud Gonne McBride, who was the muse of William Butler Yeats and someone he proposed to on a regular basis. Those were the children of the person John McBride, who McDonnell worked and fought with in 1916. So I don't know a very long answer, but no one knows why he came here and why he stayed. But he was someone who paid a very heavy price for his commitment to Irish liberty.
Redirect. So your family was crucial to him landing here and staying here. Can you tell us a little bit more about why that connection was there?
Well, we didn't bring him here. We didn't bring him here. He got to know my father and went to work in, as I said, the building where Old O'Flaherty's pub is, through the Ancient Order of Hibernians, which wasn't the
That's the connection right there.
Yeah, it wasn't the group of people, wonderful people who get together on St. Patrick's Day. This was a group very committed, the Clan na Gael, the Ancient Order of Hibernians, to breaking the bonds with England. And they supplied the monetary resources in a large way. That loan that Alan Bell, I'm pointing, I think his article's there.
Griffith was the one responsible for that. He was the treasurer at the time. For the
Yeah,
state
to support the movement here, tremendous amounts of money came from here. But my father wouldn't have met him till much later here.
Right.
He would have met him basically in the 40s.
But it wasn't AOH.
Yeah, AOH again was not the body that we see today, good people that they are. So, and he knew my uncle, and my uncle again was a student of Irish history and very sympathetic to Irish nationalism.
Wasn't your grandfather also a member of the AOH? I think I saw his name.
They were all, they all had one thing in common. They were all immigrants, and they all left the land because they saw no future there. People like McDonnell tried to build a different kind of future, and he left for another reason. Why Collins sent him here?
The money.
He was arrested. He was arrested in 1948, Michael McDonnell, in a hotel in San Francisco with $8,000 in his suitcase. So what he was doing with that, you can come to the same conclusions.
$8,000 again? $8,000.
Yeah.
That's about.
Well, let's move on from that because I can't offer any more to that. But
I'll ask you later what we think.
I think if I ever write another play, I think I have the topic of what he was doing here. Gary.
And what did he do when he was employed by your dad?
Everything. Yeah, the Farmers Union was a big department store, kind of like an Orchard Supply and Nordstrom's all put together. You could buy toys, you could buy tractors, a different realm. But he knew him mostly as someone who was just a friend. And again, he was a guy who labored with a lot of demons, as anybody who comes back from war does. Why he didn't go back to Ireland? Tim Pat Coogan asked me that. Why didn't he ever return to Ireland? I think probably.
Was still the president.
Well, there's one answer, but he had other things there, but now he had a family here, so he was attempting to build a new life, and he was building it in one person's terminology, the work of a great patriot, and in another people terminology, Gary, as you said, he was an assassin. He was an assassin, just as I guess everybody in a war is one way or another an assassin. But he was also, I think, a remarkable guy, and I just want to come back to what he sacrificed and the fact that he didn't live a long life. He died, very, very, very suddenly in 1950. But what he did and the type of funeral he had, it was a massive funeral. You had people from all over Northern California. I assume maybe there were people from other places, but maybe I'm just going to go back for a minute to Michael Collins. Michael Collins was killed in August of 1922. That was his biggest and strongest link. And let me jump to something and say, a lot of people that were very involved with John Kennedy or Bobby Kennedy, they removed themselves from politics in a certain way. At least they were never the same again. And I think maybe that was applicable, because with Michael Collins in 1922, it really died the hope of a better and more prosperous and forward-looking Ireland. And it moved back into the past, you know, but we'll debate that another day. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom,
Can I,
for that deep history of an amazing man and an amazing life. Thank you.
can I add?
We're going to move on for right now. So what I'd like to do is, and I just met this young lady, Erin Ruth Thompson. She comes to us originally from Tucson, Arizona, via Hawaii.
To a city fair rode I. There armed lines of marching men in squadrons passed me by. No fife did hum, nor battle drum did sound its dread tattoo, but the angelus bells o'er the living swell rang out in the foggy dew. But the bravest fell, and the requiem bell rang mournfully and clear for those who died that Easter tide in the springing of the year. And the world did gaze in deep amaze at those fearless men but few who bore the fight that freedom's light might shine through the foggy dew. And back through the glen I rode again, and my heart with grief was sore, for I parted then with valiant men whom I never shall see more. But to and fro in my dreams I go, and I kneel and pray for you, for slavery fled, oh glorious dead, when you fell in the foggy dew. Thank you.
Nation once again.